it contributes about half of these CO2 emissions in the world. So there is a trade-off between economic output and growth in pollution, especially the pollution causing CO2 emissions. Okay, so we have some studies have quite a number of studies have been investigate these so-called output and CO2 emission nexus, right? And usually CO2 is taken into account as a measurement of the outputs. But then some of the study also, they would think that some other factors maybe also need to be taken into the considerations, okay, such as the energy consumption mix, energy prices, trade and financial development. Okay, so in general, we also understand that from the literature that high energy consumptions will usually causes high CO2 emissions. And on the other hand, if we look at the energy prices itself, right? So based on the demand theory, we understand also like that higher energy prices will discourage energy demand. And usually the past literatures or past study that study about or investigates about these issues on the output and CO2 emission or the pollution emissions nexus, the study usually they take into consideration that international oil prices to represent the energy prices. Okay. But however, right, sometimes it becomes there's a weaknesses here when they take into this consideration because it's become unreliable when there are some offset policies to taking in place. One of the good example is the energy subsidies program. Okay, and in one of our previous paper also we mentioned about this. So therefore we need to look at the issues, right? The issue of the energy subsidy program reform as the instruments for CO2 mitigations. Because cutting down energy subsidies in a country, it will reduce the CO2 emissions. Okay, because of the lower energy usage that comes from the higher energy prices. But then on the other hand, it will also dampen the demand and perhaps the economic activity and thus the economic growth. Okay, so therefore these studies, right, we are trying to explore the relationship among these few factors. One is the energy subsidies. Then also we look at oil prices and then output, the economic growth and the CO2 emissions, especially in those oil producing countries in Asia. And we are trying to look not only the linear relationship, but it's more focused on the non-linear relationship. So in other words, we are also trying to examine the impact because of the non-linear relationship that between these factors, right? So we are trying to examine the impact of these certain threshold values on, in particular, on these energy subsidies and oil prices. How is these two impacts on the CO2 emissions? Okay, so therefore we try to use this the threshold regression model to identify this asymmetric impact of these two exogenous variables, which is energy subsidies and also the impact on the oil prices. And in terms of the contributions, this article makes several contributions. First is that we include both energy subsidies and oil prices as exogenous variable in the conventional environmental Kuznets curve model. Okay. which is usually did not find in the previous study. And the next also that we discover the asymmetric impact of energy subsidies and oil prices in CO2 emissions, okay, which is also missing on this asymmetric impact. Usually the previous study was only limited to the linear estimation. And then the point number 3 is that we include a panel of 20 oil producers countries in Asia, okay, as our sample data set. Okay, so this is based on the data availability that among the 48, especially among the 28 oil producers, we are managed to find enough, big enough panel of a 20 countries data set, okay, to help us to do the analysis for the paper or for the study, okay. So I will stop here and Zhu will continue with the presentation. Thank you. Let me stop first, stop sharing. Zhu?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Professor Dr. Lian, for the introduction. And then let me share the slide. Is it work, Madikawati?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
okay. Right. I will continue the presentation to discuss about the model that we use in this paper. We are adopting an environmental consciousness curve as our theoretical framework, where CO2 emission and gross domestic product are the exogenous and endogenous variable respectively. We use both GDP and GDP square as our exogenous variable to examine the existence of an inverted U-shaped EKC. An inverted U-shaped EKC assumes that the relationship between output and CO2 is initially positive. In this test, energy, especially fossil fuel, is highly used in the economy. Up to the certain level of output, the relationship between output and CO2 become negative. There are two factors drive to this scenario. First, the composition effect, which refers to the shift from an industrial economy to a knowledge incentive economy. This effect involves a reduction in fossil fuels consumptions in the economy. And then secondly, the technical effect, which refers to the technological change that increase the productivity and energy efficiency. Thus, the CO2 emission are decreased. And it should be noted that theoretically, the consumption pattern is very elastic to a change in price. Thus, the demand for energy will decrease in response to an increase in energy price. A decrease in energy use will cut the CO2 emission. However, oil prices are not strongly significant in representing the energy price because it becomes unreliable with the existence of energy subsidy program in economy. This is what had been explained by Professor Dr. Lian just now. The reason for introducing an energy subsidy program is to moderate the role of oil price, international oil price, in causing higher pressure on the retailing energy price. So we develop our model by including both energy subsidies and oil price as the exogenous variable to study the behavior of CO2 emission simultaneously. The gross capital formation and employment are employed as the control variable. We believe that greater production will lead the higher CO2 emission. Okay. The methodology, we employ energy subsidies and oil price as our threshold variable. This methodology just allows us to capture how the exogenous variable will react to CO2 emission when the energy subsidy is low or high and also price is cheap or expensive. About the data, in this study, we use 20 samples countries as stated in the slide. And then the data, the details of the data that we use is CO2 emission, GDP, real USD in real USD. Same goes to the gross capital formation, employment, numbers of employments, or price and fossil fuel subsidies also in real. And in order for us to capture the asymmetric effect, we use threshold analysis that has been introduced by Hans in his paper in 1999. Okay, now we go to discuss about the empirical result. Okay, our finding discover the behavior of energy subsidies to influence CO2 emission respect to its interaction with the certain value of energy subsidies and oil price. When we employ energy subsidies as our threshold variable, we found that energy subsidies are expected not to give any impact on CO2 emission when the value of energy subsidy is below USD 2 billion, 2.0546 billion. And however, it is a significant cost for CO2 emission when the value of energy subsidies is higher than 2 billion. 2.0543 billion is about 0.14%. Okay, when we employ oil price as our threshold variable, we found that the energy consumption, energy subsidies will cost CO2 at 0.1% magnitude. I mean the magnitude influence. Okay, but when in a situation where the oil price is greater than USD 71.3 per barrel, we found that the magnitude of energy subsidy to cost CO2 becomes smaller. It's about 0.09% in terms of the magnitude impact. Okay, next we move to the evidence to prove whether the EKC hypothesis is exist in our model or not. And we found that the EKC hypothesis, the theory that suggested in the EKC hypothesis, we found it just only happened when the energy subsidies is more than 2.0543 billion. And then we also try to come up with robustness checking to put the GDP square, the GDP power 3, and then we also found a consistent outcome from the statistical analysis, whereby we also found the inverted U-shape also exist when energy consumption is more than USD 2.0543 billion, meaning to say that this model suggests if, let's say, the energy subsidies is more than USD 2.0543 billion, it is considered as high. Okay, so based on our main finding, we we actually find that energy subsidy will result in higher CO2 emission when the value of energy subsidies are below than USD 2.0543 billion, as I mentioned just now. Based on the statistical analysis, the statistical model, we found that at what level actually energy subsidies can consider as high is USD 2.0546 billion. Okay, it has a higher impact on CO2 emission when the oil price is below than USD 71.3 per barrel. And we also found the EKC on the exit when the value of energy subsidies is below than USD 2.0543 billion. The output will cost and higher an increase in CO2 emission. So for the control variable, we found capital and labor are significant to cause CO2 emission. And then it is in line with the general economic theory that we understand. So for the policy implication, we suggest the government to introduce energy subsidies rationalization program that aim to optimize the use of energy. Moderating the use of energy may minimize the negative impact on the environmental. And we also believe that the existence of energy subsidies actually encourage the problem of moral hazard. So the problem of moral hazard will create will encourage overconsumption problem, and then it will lead higher energy use, and consequently it will generate, or it will increase more CO2 emission. And then we also suggest the government to execute the campaign to improve environmental quality, and because it is more effective in reducing moral hazard problem, as it improves the economic activity to use more, what do we call that, maybe to encourage them to use the technology or change the behavior towards energy efficiency. But then actually it is more, actually the campaign, it is more practical rather than we impose or introduce the tax for those who commit on the CO2 emission. Example like the industrial player that basically they will use energy more and they will pollute more energy. I think that is all for me for this slide.
Thank you, Mr. Zul, and also Dr. Hui for the excellent presentation. So personally, I think what is unique from this study is it could give a recommendation that a specific recommendation that the energy subsidies should target the correct person or group instead of overall. So it would encourage more energy saving behavior, basically to negate that moral hazard effect. So yeah, I think it is interesting because I rarely found similar recommendation from other studies, because other studies just only remark the relationship between the energy price and also the subsidies itself, not into this level of detail. Anyway, so for the next session, it's basically the Q&A session. So first, before I begin with me sharing my question, because I have quite a few to ask, I would like to invite the participants here, if any of you would like to ask a question, because I haven't seen any in the Q&A. Oh yeah, we have one from Mr. Benny. So maybe we could just start with Mr. Benny's question. So for confirmation, because maybe he missed the earlier discussion, the subsidy is referring to the subsidy for fossil fuels only, or for all subsidies including the renewable? That's the first question. And then the second question from Mr. Benny is, subsidy rationalization program, it is interesting, but how in practical the policymakers should do it? So yeah, Mr. Zul and Dr. Hui, could you respond to this first question?
Oh, okay. Let me start first.
Yeah.
Maybe Professor Tutulian want to add later. So related to the first question about the energy subsidy, either the data, the series also include the renewable energy or not, one, right? So in this case, actually, it is a total of energy subsidy, regardless they are from non-renewable or renewable energy. But somehow, in Malaysia, for your information, our energy mix energy mix in Malaysia stand at a share of more than 90% from non-renewable energy. Yes, I understand. Maybe we will think further. It has the element of renewable energy in the energy subsidies, like example, like hydroelectric. Am I right? So the hydroelectric is not from the fossil fuel, or it's not from the non-renewable energy, but then the share of the non-renewable, the share of renewable energy is very small. And secondly, to study the energy subsidies topic, one of the difficulties is that we couldn't have much data, the size, and also how detailed is the data, and it's quite controversial. If let's say we know detail on the data, I think it's quite private and quite privacy from the government to share the data. This is the best that we have, and then we can assume that our energy subsidies is dominated by to subsidize fossil fuel energy, fossil fuels subsidy. And secondly, I think I'm not really clear with the second question. Can you help me to have further understanding on that, Marika?
Yes, of course. So the question is, in your paper, you mentioned that we need subsidy rationalization program. It is the term itself is interesting, but could you please elaborate more on how policymakers should translate this term? I mean, what do you think the program should be like?
Okay. Okay. Actually, basically, if you refer to the statement from the government, not only in Malaysia, even in Indonesia and some other all producing country, actually, basically they had started the program renewable the energy subsidies rationalization program is the first objective to reduce the fiscal pressure. That is the first thing, and then they come with the idea to improve the environment. And nowadays, also we are talking about the climate change, and this is the part of the aim of the program. I still remember what the President Jokowi said in the international forum last few years. He mentioned that we need to reduce the energy subsidy. It is because first, to have a money to invest in the renewable energy. And second thing, he said it is not that practical for us to directly give the subsidies to the people. It is not really effective, since the one who deserve more just get left. So for me, actually, if let's say we need to admit that the absence of energy subsidies will affect the economy, at least some sectors. So it is important for us to, I think the problem here is that we need to ensure the energy subsidies is productive. Energy subsidies is good, actually. If we look at the theory side and the basic understanding, is good to promote competitive cost, example, and to increase the welfare. And me and Professor Dr. Lian also have a few paper talking about this. It's good, actually, but then we need to ensure that first we can minimize the problem of moral hazard. That is the first thing, okay? And then the second thing, we need to ensure the distribution for energy subsidies need to be improved. Like, we need to know who is our target group. So another question later, if let's say we demolish or we remove the energy subsidies in the future, we will facing a problem like energy poverty. Energy poverty is one of the issues that has been stressed in by UN. If you look at the, what do we call that, sustainable goal, right? And then sustainable development goal number 7 talking about energy poverty. And the developed country, I think, should be not that serious, but like Malaysia and even Indonesia, we have a large population in rural area that still struggling on energy poverty. Can you imagine, let's say we just simply demolish the energy subsidies, then what will happen to this targeted group? This is what I think. What do we need to ensure this policy is good by not really harm our environment? Yes, we, when the energy price is cheaper, then we will use more. We are not talking about we will not think more how productive, how effective. I mean, in terms of the cost, because it's cheap, we are able to buy more energy, to use more energy, one, right? But then in this case, actually, why don't we still continue with the energy subsidies rationalization? But then we are suggesting to try to improve in terms of the distribution. So we need to agree that some significant sectors will be harmed if, let's say, we simply remove the energy subsidy or reduce much the energy subsidy. This is what I think. Maybe Professor Dr. Lian have some comment or want to add my explanation.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Zhu. Let me add something. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So refer to the first questions by Mr. Benny, right? So the data for the energy subsidy, yeah, actually is quite difficult to get the complete set of data. If we can have data on the subsidy, like based on a different energy mix, for example, either is it fossil fuel or renewable, or if you can have more details, then it will be good and can help in doing more study on this. So perhaps I'm not sure that how about ASEAN Center for the Energy, do you all have any study or any data that in terms of this energy subsidy in the countries in ASEAN? Or it could be, can lead us to have this type of study or research, right? So that we can able to gather or to come up with a certain way of to gather this energy subsidies data, so that it can also help the researcher in this area to further explore more study related to energy subsidy, because we believe that energy subsidy is very important in terms of affecting the economic growth as well as the environmental pollution. This we agree on this, right? And also based on our study and other previous study, also we find this is true. Okay, so and for the subsidy rationalizations program, I think you have explained quite a lot. In fact, like for information, at one time, the Malaysian government, in fact, they plan to have this so-called subsidy rationalization program, make it more practical. One of the suggestions is that we are in the moment now, right? Our petrol price is subsidized, okay? And then, but everyone can use this subsidy. So that means everyone, if either you are very poor or you are very wealthy, also you go to the petrol station, you pump the petrol, you pay the same price, right? So that's why there's an suggestion to say that, okay, this subsidy is only for a certain group of people that with the income below a certain amount, right? So this is what we call subsidies rationalization program. And whoever that do not in this group is not entitled. But then practically it's very difficult, because when you go to the petrol station, how you want to prove your income to whether get the subsidies or not, right? So practically it's not rival. So therefore we will stop this suggestion. And I think the government still thinking of cracking their head to how to do this. So this is one of the example. Right. So next, I think there's another question from Mr. Sada, is about the source of CO2 emission. I think we use the total CO2 emissions only, right? For the carbon emission, are you referring to the like ecological footprint or some other sources that we don't include in our study here? We only use CO2 emission, only one source, right? Look. Is it that I'm answering your question for the sources of the CO2 emission? So we only have one, yeah. But perhaps, of course, if we have more data on the different type of the carbon emission, like ecological footprint, or perhaps some people will also look at the sulfur emissions, right? Of course, we can do the same, right? To use a new set of data to investigate this issue again. Okay.
Yeah. If I may interrupt, Dr. Lian, maybe we could continue to the question from Mr. David, because it is related to the discussion of energy subsidy itself. Like,
okay.
So yeah, his question
sorry,
is.
I think Zhu, can you answer this? Sorry, I need to open my door. Excuse me for one.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, Mr. Zul, so allow me to share the question from Mr. David. So now we are facing the pandemic situation, and economic recovery is definitely the priority for many countries, including ASEAN. So removing subsidy will burden the people. So in your opinion, when do you think the best timing to do the subsidy rationalization?
As I mentioned to you just now, actually, if you ask me personally, actually, first, my answer is there is no, I mean, the best timing to start this energy subsidy rationalization. For me, we need to get back to the issues and the problem, actually. So we need to think about, if let's say we remove the energy or reduce the energy, what will happen to the industry that, I mean, all intensive industry that really give a significant economic growth, a good performance in macroeconomics. First, second thing, a sector, consumer sector, we want to avoid energy poverty, right? In this case, actually, for me, the best thing is that not about the time. For me, it is all about how are we going to improve this energy subsidy. We still continue to give, but then we improve in terms of the distributions, and then the structure, how it would be, to ensure that first we can reduce the moral hazard problem. Second, we can still give, I mean, cost advantage to the industry who use more energy, who use more oil intensive energy, because they, like Malaysia and I believe Indonesia also, I mean, the industrial sector contribute more to their macroeconomy, the microeconomic performance. And then the third one, how actually we try to secure energy, energy poverty. So I think, like, there are several issues on energy strategy that we need to think about, not about the time. I think now we still can implement the energy subsidy rationalization, but with a good, with some betterment, right? And then I think other thing that I want to give some attention or highlight here, what has Indonesia is doing. Have you heard about the private power plant, or in specific auto producer, right? The auto producer here, actually, the idea is actually the industry can build up their own power plant. Okay, build up their own power plant. Actually, if let's say we have our, I mean, like a firm, a factory, we have their own power plant. Okay, actually, it is a cost on them. They can control the cost, right? And then they know better how much unit they want to use. So regardless whether they use the non renewable energy as their source of energy, or the renewable energy as a source of the energy, it is within their control. If let's say they use the public power plant, it is actually outside of their control. Sometimes the government said, okay, we want to increase the price. Okay, we want for those who use for those who pollute more emission, just like what the question just not talking about the tax one, we tax you more. So now what is the policy that I want to share you what ARNECC is doing now. They really recognize what the auto producer power plant. You can Google in further, got a report to say that the President Jokowi is really look serious on this because they want to ensure electricity supply, electricity market, energy market is more what do we call that, more efficient. Because if let's say we rely on public, it is not really efficient because it belongs to the government. The objective of the government want to increase the welfare, and then another objective of the government, they want to ensure that the economic production will enjoy cost advantage. But then somehow got the problem of moral hazard there, overuse. Okay, overuse happened there. But then when we try to encourage the industrial, and then one more thing that I want to stress down here, if we look on the consumption pie, energy consumption pie, we found that industrial sector use more energy. They use more energy, more than 80% rather than commercial sector and also the residential sector. If let's say we impose the energy subsidy rationalization, normally we are talking about who actually our target, who actually has affected more. Residential, am I right? But then in this case, actually, industrial actually use more. If let's say we do some adjustment on this industrial sector, regardless, either that, just like what I mentioned, so we can give them subsidy, but in certain level. On the other side, we need to focus on the behavior itself. The behavior itself here, I mentioned one of the good policy that the President Jokowi tried to emphasize here, the auto producer. It is included in the private power plant sector, whereby if let's say it is under the private control, I mean the firm control, actually it will more efficient for us to reduce energy consumption because they will think about the cost. Right? If they want to minimize the cost, they will try to use as minimum as they can for the energy one. In this case, actually, first we actually not rely much on the energy subsidy reduction or removal. And on the other part, also we also have another alternative to encourage them to build their own power plant in their factory. It happened. I think I monitored this case. I read a lot. The case actually in Indonesia really positive on this thing. For me, the question about the time is not about the time. It is about the strategy, the effort. How are we going to implement it so that we still can keep on a good progress on macroeconomic performance. Second, we can secure the energy poverty sector because you know why? The energy poverty is part of the welfare. You cannot simply just let it be. They don't have energy. They do not have some, what do we call that? Some some efficient energy system to for their survival. If this is what I mean.
Thank you, Mr. Zul. At some degree, I agree with you that it's not about timing, but it's more into the strategy. But listening to your description, I understand it is like, I don't know actually what President Jokowi has shared in the public about this auto power producer. But I understand it is like to make in particular the power market system to be more liberalized, more open, not to centralize into, because currently, as I understand, it's heavily centralized to PLN as the state-owned utility. And I agree with you. Maybe if in the future, the government of Indonesia want to like open up the market, so to improve the competitiveness, I agree that at certain point it will reduce the ineffectiveness of the cost and etc. So in the end, energy subsidies is no longer needed actually if the private sector already take off. So yeah, I agree with you on that. So oh yeah, Mr. David. So already say thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. David, for the question. And then maybe the last question, because the time already reaching at the end, like 10 minutes until the end. So another question, as you know, as we know, after the COP26, many ASEAN member states also like showing or announcing their net zero pledge and etc. And one implication is more policy into the climate change mitigation, and including introducing the carbon tax or implementing the carbon market, like what Indonesia just announced. And I believe Malaysia also like announced it in the 12th Malaysian plan, isn't it? Like the plan to implement the carbon tax also. So the question is, what is your opinion about using this instrument, the carbon tax or other carbon pricing, for the energy sector?
Okay, thank you, Monica. So I think carbon tax is a common policy now in the world, not only in Asia or ASEAN, right? So I think no doubt as one of the part of the world, right? So countries in ASEAN will also following the same steps, okay, to implement this carbon tax. So of course it can reduce or try to control for the environmental pollution. But because countries in ASEAN, mainly we are developing or emerging countries where we are trying to, in the progress of pushing our economic growth, right? And especially nowadays during the recovering periods, right? So people may worry that whether the implementation of the carbon tax will draw back the economics recoveries, right, or effect. Anyhow, it still have some. It is sure it will have the impacts. Okay, but it's the way of how can we control and can enhance the advantages but reduce the disadvantages of a certain policy like a carbon tax. So this I think is still in the midst of the government is still struggling to how to balance, okay, to balance up this thing, because between the energy subsidies and then the economic growth and environmental pollution, sometimes it is a dilemma to the policymaker, right? So which one we should emphasize on, right? So therefore, we can see that in the meantime, the government still not really very aggressively to push on this so-called policy that may control more on the environmental pollution. While on the other hand, the NGO, especially those environmental protectors, they always push the government to do so. So it's really a dilemma. You can see that.
Can I add something?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. If you ask me, I don't really like to tax to taxation, something like that. So in economics, we believe we tax and then we have the debt weight loss. The problem is with the debt weight loss, actually everyone is lost. Am I right? So what I'm suggesting here is that what we can do, I mean, in global level, not in the country level, in the global level, I believe that maybe in 5 or 10 years later, maybe the World Trade Organization will impose one more thing. So if let's say now, actually you can see the example like palm oil, right? If let's say the producer, a country who produces the palm oil use the child labor, right? The child labor or not really obey, not really follow or ignore the element of the, what do we call it, human right. Even though we offer them a good price, they will not buy from to us, like US or some other European country, right? So in this case, we also can impose this. If let's say the country is not so green, so-called so green, then we don't want to buy good from you. It is some like a force from the other, then we impose them the tax, then we can do that one. So we need to green to make our economy green, then we can do an international trade. If not, regardless how good is your price, if you are not really green, I don't like to do business with you. This is what I think.
So yeah, it's interesting idea, but yeah, interesting idea. Similar to like implementing the carbon tax and also carbon pricing, but instead of that, we just have the brand of green. So if not using the green business, we just don't use it. So yeah, interesting. Anyway, the interesting idea, and it's interesting also to explore whether is it doable or how in the implication into economy. Actually, I have one question, my personal question. So, in your conclusion, you note that if the energy subsidy is more than 2.05 billion is considered high. So this number, is it applied to all the 20 countries that is used in your study, or is it like the cumulative for these 20 countries?
Dr. Lian, you want me to answer first?
Never mind, you go first.
Okay. Okay. Basically, this is more to the statistical approach actually. But then the basic idea is that we have an idea at certain level. Energy subsidy is considered as high, and then the behavior of energy subsidy to affect CO2 become different. That is actually the basic idea. If let's say the question is all about how practical is that number, it's quite subjective. So in this case, we use this sample and then we use the panel data analysis, and we believe this panel approach try to do the best thing. The suggestion of the where is the threshold point here actually it is just the language of the statistic, the language of the numbers only. We cannot take for granted this is the absolute number. No, but then this statistic, this model is actually trying to give us some better understanding what the point whereby if let's say the energy subsidy is increased, the change the behavior is changed. This is what is the thing, not really about the numbers. Yes, sir.
Noted on
Yeah,
that.
because sorry.
Yeah, please, Doctor.
We use a panel analysis. So we collected the data for the energy subsidies for these 20 countries and within these sample periods of 2010 to 2018. So it's about 9 years, right? So then one of the advantage of this threshold analysis is that when we do the estimations, right, the test or this method, it will provide us the numbers, okay, numbers, what we call a threshold value, okay. So this number is provided from collecting from the data that we put in, we input. So that's why this 2 million something, right, USD, in fact, is I would think that is on average between these 20 sample country for this sample period of 9 years. So if you change the sample country or you change the sample period, the numbers will change, okay? Because this is a statistically or econometrically analysis. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lin, and also Mr. Zhou for the answer. I think because we already reached the end of our scheduled time. In fact, I need more time to promote a bit of our future activities. So allow me to take over the session now to share a bit of the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project future activities. Wait a moment. Where is the share screen? That okay. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so I would like to share a bit of our activities at ACCEPT. First is about ASEAN, about ARNECC, ASEAN Research Network of Energy and Climate Change is a group of scholars, analysts, researchers, students, and other stakeholders organized under the themes of energy and climate studies. The main objective is to facilitate the discussion like this with researchers in ASEAN that have the same interests from any discipline or level of experience and not limited to any particular technology, sector, or topic. To register, please check our ARNECC webpage here. And if you have further questions, please let us know by emailing Benny Suryadi at aseanenergy.org. Next. So back then in July, we have launched the ARNECC Research Database, a database that aims to be a platform for ARNECC member or any researcher that want to share their publication on energy climate topic to be disseminated more effectively to the Southeast Asian readers. So we have the ARNECC Research Database. The ARNECC Research Database has reached 155 curated papers as of now. And please note that this database takes the copyright terms seriously. So as you may later check in our website that this database only provides the link to the original DOI page. So we have received positive feedbacks then and want to keep the numbers growing. So we are inviting all the researchers here in ASEAN who want to showcase their paper to simply submit details of your publication at the link here. Next is, other than ARNECC Research Database, we want to keep the monthly paper talk keep going also. And so we would like to have it also next month at December, but maybe on the second or third week, because after the second or third week, probably we're all in holiday mood already. So here I'm also inviting all the researchers who want their paper to be showcased to the ASEAN audience from government, academic institution, and private sectors to please send detail of your paper, short bio, and photo to accept.com at aseanenergy.org. I think that's all the updates from our side, and we have reached the end and also maybe surpassed the scheduled time. So allow me to share my appreciation to our distinguished experts here, Mr. Zul and Dr. Lian, for the insights and your valuable time for this event. And I would like to also sincerely appreciate the active participation from our audience here. Again, please stay safe and healthy and look forward to see you again in the next month of ARNECC Paper Talks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Monica,
Doctor.
and
Yeah. Thank you, Medikawati. See you around.
Yes, see you around too.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.